Welcome back, everybody, to the Battle of the States and Providences Week 2. Almost everybody kicked off their season. There's a few teams that still haven't, but we'll get into those teams, and with that, let's get going. Going into Pod 1, Middlebury is the only team that did not play this week. We have Lenore Ryan sitting at the top spot. They had Bowie State come to town where they won 32-19. South Dakota State bounces back as they beat Incarnate Ward 45-24, giving them the second slot with a single point. The Saskatchewan was not able to pull out a win as they lost to Regina. The Regina Rams 28-33, making them fall all the way to fourth. Let's kind of look at what each of these teams that's coming up in the final 2 weeks of round one. Lenore Ryan is looking to stay on top as they have Tiffin coming to town, and then they travel to Mars Hill in week 4. Middlebury is hoping for 2 solid weeks as they are currently sitting in third place as they start their season as they welcome Wesley into town. Then they travel the next week as they travel to Bowdoin. Saskatchewan, they're hoping to get out of cellar as they welcome Calgary to town this next week. And then in week 4, they travel to British Columbia, which is going to be a tough test for them. South Dakota State, on the other hand, is looking to continue their good winning ways as they stay home and welcome Augusta to town. They wrap up their non-conference season before starting conference play with Southeastern Louisiana. All right, only Benedict didn't play this week, but that's not bad for them. They already had a game under their belt. Wartburg traveled to Monmouth, Illinois, where they won 38-24. St. Francis Xavier had Acadia come to town, where they were barely lost to 22-24. New Hampshire was able to bounce back against Holy Cross by beating them 21-20. So after all that, this is one of the roughest looking pods that we have. Wartburg was able to come out on top with just 8 points after one game. Benedict, with not playing this week, is in second with -17. St. Francis Xavier is in third with -20. And even with a win, New Hampshire is still sitting at -48. Kind of looking at what they all have to come. Wartburg stays on the road as they travel to St. John's, Minnesota, which is going to be a tough test. For the third straight week, they stay on the road, traveling to Central for the first American Rivers Conference game on the 21st. St. Francis Xavier, they stay at home as they welcome Mount Allison to town. And they head back on the road as they travel to St. Mary's. Benedict has their home opener against Lane College. And in week 4, they stay at home welcoming Edward Waters to town. New Hampshire has their home opener against Stonehill. And they stay at home in week 4 as they welcome Bryant to town. This one should wrap up pretty nicely, but we will see where everybody ends up. Hopefully we have some good games coming up. 3. Pod 3 had all 4 teams on the field this week, with Harding opening up the season with a 59-0 win over Southern Nazarene. SMU lost at home to BYU 15-18. Sylvia Regina welcomed Curry to town where they won 28-10. Manitoba traveled to British Columbia where they won 33-10. Going into week 3, Harding took over the top spot with 64.5 points. Then SMU falls to second place with 58.5 points, with Manitoba also falling 1 spot, but creeping up into the second spot with 48.5 points. Then, with only 1 game under their belt, Sylvia Regina has 23 points. This is actually one of the tightest pods, with only 41 points between the number 1 team and the number 4 team. One thing I will point out, this pod's kind of one of the better ones. You can see the dispersity of points. You can see where you can have all the way, you can get in the high 60s, we'll see possibly later on even bigger scores for some of these teams. Let's look at the future weeks for these. SMU only has 1 game remaining for the round 1, where they finish up their non-conference against TCU at home for the Battle of the Iron Skillet. Manitoba travels to British Columbia, and then they welcome Alberta Town for their homecoming game. Harding has their travels this next week to Oklahoma Baptist. Then they stay on the road as they travel to Arkansas Monticello. Silver Regina has their first travel game as they head to Western New England, and then they stay on the road to face Rochester. In the Pod 4, all four teams were again on the field with two teams competing against each other. Friends traveled to Ottawa where they continued their dominance. They won 49-20. Oregon had Boise State to come down where they were able to pull out a win of 37-34. Mount Allison had St. Mary's come to town, but was able to continue their home winning streak and lost 22-23. Friends stays on top this week with 89 points and looking to possibly lock up a spot in the next round with a good victory this next week over Avila. With the win over Boise State, Oregon hops then to take the second spot with 23 points. Boise State drops to third with 8.5 points. Mount Allison lost this week. Mount Allison's loss this week drops them down to negative 11 or fourth place. Like I said, there's a good chance not Avila, sorry. That's who Friends is traveling to play this week in Kansas City. Friends has a good chance of locking up as long as they don't have a terrible loss against either Avila or Kansas Wesleyan. Boise State is off, but then in week 4 they welcome Portland State to the blue turf. Oregon this week they travel to Corvallis for the rivalry series against the Oregon State. That still kind of throws me off hearing that phrase. Then they remain on the road as they travel down to Pasadena for their first Big Ten conference game against UCLA. Week 3 for Mount Allison has St. Francis Xavier as they travel there, and then they welcome Bishops to town. Going, all the teams again were on the field this week, and for Pod 5, Alabama had an easy week as Western Kentucky came to town and they won 63-0. Montreal traveled to Louisville where they lost 22-23. Central Missouri opened the season with a solid win over Northeastern State, 63-21. Howard welcomed Marihurst to town where they were able to pull out a win of 32-31. With Montreal losing and Alabama winning, they were able to jump into the top spot with 99 points. Montreal's fallen to second with 75.5 points. Central Missouri, with only one game, already has 47 points at third. Howard needs a solid win or they will not be able to make it out of the first round as they sit with negative 32 points. Again, just like with Friends, Alabama has a good shot of locking up this, but they need a solid win as they travel off to Wisconsin to face the Badgers, and then they are off in week 4, so they only got one more game to solidify their spot in the next round. Same way with Montreal. Montreal welcomes Concordia to town, and then they are off in week 4. Central Missouri has 2 games where they are hoping to get into one of the top 2 spots. They open up MIAA play on the road against Central Oklahoma. Then they stay on the road as they take on Davenport, Michigan in a non-conference game. Howard travels to East Rutherford for the HBCU New York City Football Classic against Morehouse College. Then they make the trip over to Audi Field where they take on Hampton in the battle of the real HU. So they got 2 big neutral site games coming up. Hopefully they can pull out some good wins and get back into the race for the top slot. Both Central Missouri and Howard have a good shot with Montreal and Alabama off in week 4. Going into pot 6, only Hawaii didn't play. Oklahoma was able to defend their home turf as they beat Houston 16-12. Notre Dame was not able to defend their home turf as they lost 14-16 in Northern Illinois. And Michigan had Texas come to the Big House where they were not able to keep up and lost 12-31. With all these losses, Hawaii was able to hang in there in the second slot. Oklahoma, with their small victory, was able to hop into the number 1 spot with 62 points. Notre Dame, with a loss, was able to move up to 3rd, and Michigan falls to the 4th spot. This one is another tight race with only 62 points between the number 1 team and the 4th place team. After their loss, Michigan is hoping to get back on track as they welcome Arkansas State to town. Then they open up Big Ten play as they welcome one of the newest members, USC, to the Big House. Notre Dame hopes to get back on track as they travel to West Lafayette to face Purdue, and then they welcome Miami, Ohio, to South Bend. Oklahoma welcomes Tulane to Norman, Oklahoma for week 3, and then in week 4 they open up SEC as they welcome Tennessee to town. Hawaii travels to Sam Houston in week 3, and then in week 4 they welcome Northern Iowa. So Hawaii, with their schedule, they actually have a good shot at keeping one of those top 2 slots. Michigan and Notre Dame are now question marks just with the way they played again. Michigan is a little easier to swallow just because Texas has a solid squad, whereas Notre Dame lost to a inferior team in Northern Illinois. They should have won that one easily. But with all that, let's go ahead and go to pot 7. Only Delaware didn't take the field. UW Whitewater opened the season against John Carroll at home as they won 34-7. Aurora opened the season on the road against DeCue and won 33-21. And then British Columbia had Manitoba come to town where they lost 10-33. British Columbia is right now in 4th place still with -46. Delaware, even with not playing, they were able to keep the top spot. UW Whitewater takes over the 2nd place all by themselves, and Aurora takes over 3rd. This is going to be another close one as we come down to it. Aurora welcomes North Central to town for their home opener, which is going to be a very tough test. That's North Central's first game of the season. And then Aurora opens up conference play in week 4 as they will play against St. Norbert. UW Whitewater travels to Roosevelt in week 3, and then they welcome Mary Hardin Baylor to town. Delaware travels to Greensboro, North Carolina, where they play North Carolina A&T. And then they stay at home as they welcome Ivy League school Penn to town. British Columbia, who is hoping to possibly get back on track, travels to face Regina, and then they stay at home in week 4 as they welcome Saskatchewan to Vancouver. Going into Pod 8, everybody was on the gridiron this week. Western Ontario was able to continue their dominance with a 52-21 win over Carleton. Delta State welcomed Missouri S&T to town where they won 55-18. Mount Union traveled to Furman for their first game of the season and won 55-6. Wyoming welcomed Idaho to town and were not able to get the home win as they lost 13-7. After all this, Western Ontario, with their continued dominance, looks as if they have officially locked up a spot in the next round with 143.5 points. As long as they don't have any major losses, they will be fine. Then Delta State staying in the 2nd with 78.5 points. Mount Union coming in 3rd with 55 points, putting up a fight for 2nd place. And Wyoming 108 points back from 3rd with -53 points. They need a couple of good wins Uh, they need a couple good wins, but they have a really tough test as they welcome BYU to Laramie, and then they travel down to North Texas in week 4. Mountain Union, they are off this next week, so they are going to only have 2 games. So they need a solid win as they welcome John Carroll to town in week 4 for their home opener, which is going to be very tough for them as Delta State travels to Wingate in week 3. Then they welcome Fort Valley to town in week 4. Western Ontario only has one more game left in this round as they travel to Lenore in week 3 and they are off in week 4. So with this, it's kind of looking like everything's locked up, but you never know how the football's going to bounce as Delta State has those 2 games. Mount Union needs a really good win over John Carroll in order to even have a shot. Going to Pod 9. Only Trinity, Connecticut did not play this week, so they are going to be having a tough test to try to get out of round 1. St. John's, Minnesota opened the season up with a solid win versus Carthage as they won 49-0. Colorado Mines won their home opener against West Texas A&M 41-13. Then Mammoth, New Jersey, unfortunately continues their losing streak as Lafayette comes to town with a 40-35 victory over Monmouth. With a solid win, St. John's comes out on top with 54 points, followed by Colorado with 33. Trinity, who, like I said, they need a couple good wins to make sure that they got a shot, is at 0 points. And then Monmouth needing some wins as they come in last place with -27. So Colorado Mines in the next 2 weeks, they travel to Topeka, Kansas to face off against Washburn. And then they play Concordance State for the opening of Rocky Mountain Conference games in week 4. Trinity, Connecticut opens the season this week with Colby College. And then they travel to Maine. Sorry, I'm kind of laughing at my notes right now. Then they travel to Maine to face off against Bates. In week 4, they need 2 solid wins to have a shot. St. John's, Minnesota stays at home as they welcome Wartburg to town. That should be a really good game. And then they travel to Bethel, Minnesota, to open conference play. Like I said, Monmouth needs a couple good wins, but unfortunately it's going to be very tough. They travel to Maine for the opening of conference play, and then they travel down to Miami. So Monmouth, just looking at their schedule, you can pretty much almost rule that they will not make it out. With Colorado Mines, they have 2 solid opponents coming up. Washburn is not one of the top teams, but they always put up a good fight. Same way with Concordance State. Let's go to Pod 10. North Central is still off, but North Dakota State, they will bounce back with a 52-3 win over Tennessee State. Charleston, West Virginia continues their winning streak as California PA came to town and they were won 23-19. Southern Utah traveled to El Paso and was able to get a solid win over FBS UTEP 27-24. With Notre Dame's bounce back, they jumped to the top spot with 48 points, with Charleston falling to second, even with a win with 45.5 points. Both of these teams need another solid win. They might wrap up this pod pretty easily. North Central still has got to have 2 solid showings in order to even have a chance to move out into the next round. Then Southern Utah comes in last with -43.5 points. They are looking like they are going to be falling off. Like I said, North Central opens up the season traveling to Aurora. And then in week 4, they stay on the road as they travel to Carthage. Both those are going to be very tough games, but North Central should come out on top. North Dakota State's hoping to stay on top as they travel to East Tennessee, and then they welcome Towson to Fargo. This is where North Central could easily get over the top. Charleston is off this week, and then they welcome UNC Pembroke to town to kick off Mountain East play. Southern Utah finally has some non-FBS opponents as they come home to face UC Davis. And then they are back on the road to travel north to face off against Idaho State. Everybody was playing in Pod 11. Claremont Mud Scripps opened the season with a solid win over Chicago. LSU was able to get back on track as they beat Nichols 44-21. Kaiser was able to pull out an overtime win over Division III North Greenville 23-20. Ottawa, Arizona started off the season on the losing side as Texas Wesleyan came to town and won 35-33. Claremont Mud Scripps gets to stay on top with 29 points. LSU, with a solid win, are able to get back in the positive with 20 points. Kaiser comes in third with 7.5, and then followed by the only losing team this week with negative 8.5 points for Ottawa, Arizona. Kaiser will be staying on the road this week as they face another Division III opponent in Newberry College. And I will point out something. I said this in the beginning, but for Division play, where if you have actually Division III lower than NAIA, so they could lose even more points if Newberry wins. It'd only be a point, but it still would kind of hurt them. Then they have their home opener against Fort Lauderdale. I'll go ahead and go back to that point real quick. The reason for that is NAIA can offer scholarships, whereas Division III does not offer football scholarships. It's all academic scholarships and other stuff like that. But let's go out to Ottawa, Arizona, where they are only going to have 2 games for this first round, where they are off in week 3, but then in week 4 they stay home and play Texas College. LSU opens up SEC play on the road against South Carolina. Then they welcome UCLA to Tiger Stadium in week 4. Both of those teams are 2 solid teams. UCLA is still kind of learning under a new head coach, and South Carolina is kind of on a hot streak. Claremont Mud Scripps is off this week. So again, just like Ottawa, they are only going to have 2 games for this first round. And in week 4, they are going to be traveling to face George Fox. So this one's kind of anyone's game. It just kind of matters how does LSU do with their 2 games left, and along with that, how does Kaiser do with their 2 games left. Going into Pod 12, everyone was on the field. Wayne State, Nebraska continued dominating their dominant winning streak as they traveled to MSU Moorhead and won 44-17. He did travel to St. Lawrence, where they won 44-13. Randolph-Macon opened the season at Dickerson College, where they won 47-21. Johns Hopkins opened the season on the road as they beat Ithaca 27-23. With all that, Wayne State stays on top with 70.5 points, followed by Edith with 37 points, Randolph-Macon at 32 points, and Johns Hopkins at 4th with 10 points. If Wayne State could get another very solid win this week, they could easily lock up the number 1 slot, or at least lock up one of the top 2 spots. But let's look at their future schedules. Randolph-Macon has Hobart College come to town for their home opener. Then they stay at home as Berry College comes to town in week 4. Johns Hopkins travels to Christopher Newport. Then they stay at home against Salisbury week 4. Edith travels to Ithaca, and then they have their home opener versus Hilbert. Wayne State has Minnesota State come to town, and then they travel to Winona State. Like I said, there's a very good chance with Wayne State having still 2 games left, they could easily come out on top, but you never know. Everybody else, this is going to come down probably 2 week 4 to see who gets at least the second place spot. Wayne State might have everything locked up after this week. Going into Pod 13, again, everybody was on the field. Georgia continued their dominance as they beat Tennessee Tech 48-3. Washington continued their winning ways as they beat Eastern Michigan 30-9. Houston opened up the season against Providences State with a win, 56-14. Pikeville unfortunately only lost this week as they suffered another close loss to Georgetown to 20-3. Washington was not able to hold on to the top spot as Georgia jumps them with 86 points. Washington falls to second with 63. Houston comes in third with 47 points, with Pikeville on a 2-game losing streak coming in fourth with negative 11.5. This one is truly going to be one that comes down to week 4, as all 4 teams have 2 games each. We'll be playing in both weeks. Pikeville travels to Cumberland, Kentucky for their first road trip. Then they stay on the road as they travel to Faulkner. Georgia travels to Kentucky for their SEC opener. Then they stay on the road as they travel to Alabama for another SEC game. So Georgia has 2 solid games. You got to worry about the Kentucky game because they might overlook Kentucky. You don't want to do that as they get ready for the Alabama game. Washington has the Apple Cup against Washington State this week, and then they welcome Northwestern to town for their first Big Ten Conference game. Both of those are going to be very hard games. Washington State, just with that being a rivalry game, and then Northwestern, you never know what you're going to see out of them. For Houston, they stay at home with Springfield coming to town, and they travel. And then they had their first away game at Norwich. Springfield and Norwich are both 2 tough teams. Again, they are some teams that aren't near the top, but they always put up good fights. Let's go to Pod 14, where we saw UNLV welcome FCS Utah Tech to town, where they won 72-14. Cortland opened up their season on the road with a 76-0 win over Empire 8 opponent Hilbert. Montana traveled to Grand Forks where they lost 24-27. New Mexico State was not able to get a win as they lost to Liberty 24-30 for a CUSA loss. UNLV was able to stay on top with 88.5 points, but Cortland plays only 1 game, has 82.5 points. Then Montana with hoping the top teams take a tumble. Wow, let me start over. Then we have Montana coming in with 2 points, hoping both of the top 2 teams take a tumble, with New Mexico State coming in last with negative 0.5. So for the future games, all 4 of these teams play both weeks. Cortland State, they have Lincecum come to town for their home opener, and then they travel to Susquehanna. Montana welcomes Morehead State to town, and then they stay at home as they welcome Western Carolina. New Mexico State travels to Fresno State, and then they stay on the road for another CUSA game as they travel to face Sam Houston. UNLV travels to face Kansas, and then they open up Mountain West play as they welcome Fresno State to town. So all 4 of these teams, Cortland State probably has the easiest way to get out. Both Lincecum and Susquehanna are not top teams, so they should easily beat them. Montana, Morehead's always a tough team, but Western Carolina traveling to Montana could be tough for them. Having Fresno State and Sam Houston back to back they should easily beat Sam Houston, but you never know what's going to happen with this new New Mexico State team. And then UNLV also kind of has a tough test as they travel to face Big 12 Kansas, and then they welcome Fresno State for opening. So this was going to be very interesting. Cortland and UNLV might lock this all up after this week. And the final pot. Northwestern Iowa traveled to Hastings, where they won 41-7 to open up a GPAC conference play. Penn State welcomed Bowling Green to town, where they were able to come out on top with a 34-27 win. Bethel, Tennessee welcomed Mary Hardin Baylor to town, where they won 20-21. Alberta welcomed Calgary to town, where they lost 22-36. Northwestern jumps into the top spot with 40.5 points. Penn State drops to second with 39.5 points, with Bethel, Tennessee nipping at their heels with 34 points, and Alberta coming in last with 5 points. This is another very tight conference. We will see what happens in week 4. Penn State is off this next week, but then in week 4 they welcome Kent State to town. But Northwestern and Iowa, they welcome Mount Marty to town for their home opener, and then they stay at home as Midland comes to town. Both those teams shouldn't pose any threat to Northwestern and Iowa. They should be able to dominate them. They might easily be able to lock up the number 1 slot if everything goes as planned. Bethel, Tennessee travels to Columbus, Georgia, where they face Thomas, and then they stay on the road as they go to West Virginia to face Bluefield. Both those teams are solid teams. It will be interesting to see how they come out in those. Alberta will travel to Manitoba in week 3, and then they head back to face Regina. Penn State could be in trouble. They got to hope that in week 4 they have a good showing with as close as everything is. But with all that, as always, I use the AP poll for the FBS, FCS, D2, D3. I use the coaches poll, and then in the IA, I use the head coaches poll as well. U Sports, I use the overall ranking, which starting this week was only a top 10, with everybody else receiving votes. Starting next week, we are probably actually going to see some teams lock up. If not their seeding, if not their spot, at least lock up a top 2 spot. So I hope you continue to join me for this fun journey. And starting next week, we're going to see who's all going to make it to round 2. Have fun, everybody.